For centuries, a shadow has lingered over the sands of Canaan. Two names whispered as if they were one: Philistines and Palestinians. But what if the resemblance is a deception? What if history itself has been rewritten and the truth locked away beneath layers of empire, conquest, and prophecy? Tonight we unseal that vault. We will trace the bloodlines of vanished warriors, the schemes of ancient kings, and the words of prophets who saw beyond their own time. What begins as a question of history will unfold as a revelation of destiny. And so our journey begins, with the people who once stood as Israel's most feared enemy, the Philistines. The Philistines were not born in the land of Canaan. They did not rise from its soil nor trace their lineage through the hills of Judea. They came by sea, mysterious, unstoppable, a tide of warriors sweeping across the Mediterranean. History remembers them as part of the Sea Peoples, a confederation of raiders who in the late Bronze Age shattered kingdoms, burned cities, and left entire civilizations in ruins. Wooden warships cutting through the waves, sails filled with foreign winds, their prows carved with the shapes of beasts. From Crete perhaps, or from distant shores of the Aegean, no one is entirely certain. What we know is this: they did not arrive as peaceful settlers, but as invaders, conquerors, men and women who carried both skill and terror across the waters. The weapon that changed history. While others still wielded bronze, the Philistines brought iron. Their forges glowed hotter, their blades cut sharper, their chariots thundered louder. To possess iron was to hold the future. The Philistines stepped onto the stage of history carrying not only the sword, but the secret of metallurgy itself. In one generation, they tipped the balance of power in the ancient Near East. From the coastal plains of southern Canaan, they carved out their dominion. 5 great cities rose: Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, and Gath. Together they formed a pentapolis, a league of strength that dominated trade routes, commanded the sea, and defied every power around them. When you hear the word Gaza today, it echoes back 3,000 years to the beating heart of Philistine power. But the Philistines were more than warriors. They were a culture steeped in religion, ritual, and gods that Israel knew only as rivals and abominations. They worshipped Dagon, a deity of grain and the sea whose temples towered above their cities. They offered sacrifices to Baal, lord of storms and fertility, and to Ashtoreth, goddess of love and war. Here in this clash of faiths lies the great shock line: their gods were not the God of Israel. Their altars blazed with strange fire. Their festivals rang with chants to idols. And this difference, this sharp line between Yahweh and the gods of Philistia, would ignite centuries of bloodshed. Consider what this meant for Israel. On one side, a people chosen by covenant, called to worship one God, invisible, holy, unseen. On the other, a league of cities armed with superior weapons, protected by temples, bound together in a culture that exulted in strength and defiance. Every border skirmish, every raid, every battle was more than politics. It was theology written in blood. And yet the Philistines were not merely villains in the biblical story. They were instruments of testing. Their pressure forced Israel to grow, to seek divine strength rather than human might. Without the Philistines, there would be no Samson tearing lions and toppling temples. Without the Philistines, there would be no shepherd boy standing against a giant. God allowed them to rise so that his people would discover who truly held the power. The Philistines entered history like a storm, bringing with them iron idols and intimidation. But even storms are permitted. Even storms serve a purpose in the unfolding design of God. If they arrived by sea, if they ruled with iron, if they bowed to gods of stone, why did they vanish? Why does no Philistine walk the earth today? The answer begins with prophecy, with battles yet to come, with a story that does not end at the shores of Canaan. And so to understand the true weight of their name, we must step into the battles where legends were born, the stories of heroes, of giants, of altars collapsing into dust. Welcome to the struggle of Samson, of David, and of the Ark of the Covenant. To Israel, the Philistines were not just another rival tribe. They were the very embodiment of opposition, the constant reminder that destiny is always tested by fire. When the Philistines rose to power, Israel was still young, fragile, searching for identity and strength. And into this crucible, God raised heroes, men who would stand alone against an entire nation, proving that covenant was stronger than iron. The first name is whispered with awe and sorrow: Samson, a judge of Israel, consecrated from birth, gifted with supernatural strength. His hair was not merely a symbol, it was a sign that he belonged to God. Yet his story is not simple victory, but tragedy laced with glory. Against the Philistines, Samson was a one-man army striking down enemies with the jawbone of a donkey, tearing gates from city walls, making the invincible tremble. Samson, blinded and humiliated, chained in the temple of Dagon. The enemy mocked him, their God exalted their victory certain. But in his final act, Samson prayed a dangerous prayer. "Let me die with the Philistines." With hands pressed against the pillars, he pushed. The temple shook, the roof collapsed, and thousands perished in a single breath. This was not merely architecture falling. This was theology in motion. The temple of Dagon, the pride of Philistia, crumbled before the God of Israel. Shock line. When Samson pulled down those pillars, it was not just a building that collapsed. It was a cosmic clash between Yahweh and the gods of the Philistines. And though Samson died, the name of Israel's God thundered louder than the chants of Dagon. The Philistines remained. Their armies marched, their chariots roared, their cities stood tall. Israel's struggle continued, and the next hero was not a man of brute strength, but a boy with a sling. The Valley of Elah. Two armies facing one another, fear choking the hearts of Israel. Out stepped a giant Goliath of Gath. His height was staggering, his armor gleaming, his spear like a weaver's beam. He taunted Israel, mocked their God, demanded a champion. None dared move. Day after day, his voice rang out like thunder. And then came David, a shepherd boy too young for war, carrying no sword, no shield, only a sling and 5 smooth stones. To the Philistines, he looked like a joke, a child marching to his death. David's words pierced louder than Goliath's spear. "You come to me with sword, spear, and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts." The stone flew, the giant fell, and the battlefield froze in silence. The shepherd boy who killed a giant proved once and for all it was not weapons, but the presence of God that decides history. From that day, David's name rose while Goliath's became a warning, a shadow of arrogance defeated by faith. These stories are not fairy tales. They are echoes of reality, moments where history bent, where the weak triumphed over the mighty, where human logic was overturned by divine intervention. They tell us something profound. God does not need numbers, nor iron, nor chariots. He needs only those who trust him. If this moment stirs your spirit, share in the comments the battles you have faced that seemed impossible and how faith carried you through. Your story may be the stone in someone else's hand, but the conflict did not end with Samson nor with Goliath. The Philistines still pressed forward, and Israel still bled. Time and again, the Ark of the Covenant itself would be taken. Cities would fall, kings would rise and stumble. The struggle between Israel and Philistia was more than military. It was a struggle for meaning, for identity, for the right to declare whose God ruled the earth. And so the stage was set for something larger than personal heroics, for the clash of nations, for the fall of kings, and for the fulfillment of prophecy. If heroes could rise and fall, if giants could be slain, then what could bring the Philistines themselves to ruin? To answer this, we must look beyond individual battles to the rise and fall of empires, and to the prophets who saw their end long before the final blow. For a time, the Philistines seemed untouchable. Their 5 cities glittered with wealth, their forges roared with fire, their warriors marched with the strength of iron. They controlled the coastal trade routes, that narrow strip of land connecting Egypt to the empires of Mesopotamia. Whoever controlled Philistia controlled the lifeline of the ancient world. Gold, grain, oil, and wine all passed through their hands. Imagine the markets of Ashkelon overflowing with goods from every corner of the Mediterranean. The Philistines were more than raiders. Now they were merchants, princes of the sea. Their coffers filled their armies, grew their chariots, thundered across the plain. To Israel, hemmed in by mountains and valleys, they were a shadow too large to escape, and even kings trembled before them. Saul, Israel's first king, the man chosen by the people to stand tall to fight their wars, met his end at the hands of the Philistines. His body, along with that of his son Jonathan, was left desecrated on the walls of Beth-shan. The king chosen by men fell before the gods of Philistia, but the boy chosen by God, David, would rise to shatter their grip forever. David's victories were not merely military triumphs, they were theological statements. Every battle he fought against the Philistines echoed a larger truth. Yahweh was greater than Dagon, stronger than Baal, sovereign over every chariot, sword, and shield. Under David's reign, the Philistines were pushed back, their dominance broken. For the first time, Israel breathed freely without the looming shadow of the Pentapolis. Empires rise only to fall again. The Philistines' story was not to end with defeat by David. They still lingered bruised but alive, their cities rebuilt, their pride intact. Yet the prophets of Israel spoke of a darker destiny. Amos thundered, "For 3 transgressions of Gaza, and for 4, I will not revoke the punishment." Zephaniah declared, "Woe to you, inhabitants of the seacoast, O nation of the Cherethites! The word of the Lord is against you." These were not idle words. They were verdicts from heaven, pronouncements that the Philistines' power would not endure. And then came Babylon. The empire of iron marched westward, devouring every kingdom in its path. The Philistines, once masters of iron themselves, could not stand against the relentless force of Nebuchadnezzar. One by one, their cities fell. Gaza burned. Ashkelon was leveled. Ashdod lay in ruins. The Pentapolis that once ruled the trade of the seas was ground into dust beneath the Babylonian war machine. The prophets had warned. The hammer of Babylon fell, and the Philistines were no more. Not scattered, not absorbed, but erased, vanished from the stage of history. Unlike Egypt, which survived conquest, or Israel, which endured exile, the Philistines left no trace, no dynasty, no people. Their name became a ghost, remembered only in scripture, feared only in memory. How strange that a people who seemed invincible could disappear so completely. 1 century they were kings of the coast, the next they were nothing. It is a sobering reminder no empire is eternal. Wealth cannot save, armies cannot preserve. Only God determines the lifespan of nations, and yet their name would not die. Centuries later, long after their people were gone, Rome would resurrect the word Philistia as Palaestina, a political weapon, a strategy to erase Israel's memory from its land. The Philistines had vanished, but their name would echo through history, reshaped, repurposed, reborn. The people are gone, but the name survives. And that name, Palestine, would one day ignite the most enduring conflict of the modern world. So if the Philistines disappeared, yet their name endured, how did it become attached to a new people centuries later? To answer this, we must turn to Rome rebellion and a name forged not in ancestry, but in conquest. Welcome to the story of how Philistia became Palaestina. The Philistines had vanished. Their temples lay in ruins, their gods silenced, their cities swallowed by the dust of Babylon. By the time of the Roman Empire, no one spoke their language, no one traced their lineage. The people were gone. And yet the name remained waiting in the shadows, ready to be resurrected. After the crucifixion of Christ, after the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD, Judea staggered under Roman rule. But the spark of rebellion would not die. 60 years later, it erupted in one final flame, the Bar Kokhba revolt. Fierce, desperate, it was a war to reclaim Israel's land, its temple, its identity. For a moment it seemed the rebels might succeed, but Rome was merciless. The legions crushed the revolt, burned towns, slaughtered thousands. And then, to ensure no memory of Jewish sovereignty remained, the Emperor Hadrian wielded not the sword, but the pen. In a stroke of imperial decree, Judea was erased from the maps of the empire. In its place, a new name was carved, Syria Palestina. And here lies the twist: the Romans did not choose this word by accident. They reached into the grave of history, pulled out the name of Israel's ancient enemy, the Philistines, and grafted it onto the land of the Jews. This was not honor. This was humiliation. Not remembrance, but revenge. The Philistines were long dead, yet Rome resurrected their name as a weapon to erase Israel's identity, to sever the bond between land and people, to rewrite memory itself. For centuries, Israel had wrestled against the Philistines. The prophets had proclaimed their end, and indeed they were destroyed. But now their name was reborn not as flesh and blood, but as geography. Geography transformed into ideology, a label designed not to describe, but to destroy. The world forgot the difference. Slowly, the name Palaestina detached from the Philistines and took on a life of its own. As centuries passed, it came to mean the land itself, the hills, the valleys, the plains once walked by patriarchs and prophets. Maps were drawn, chronicles written. And in the minds of nations, the word Palestine eclipsed the memory of Judea. A name became a shadow over history, a fog that blurred the line between the vanished and the living. The Philistines no longer existed, but the name Rome revived would one day carry new meaning, new conflict, new blood. Theologians saw it. Church fathers wrote of Palestine as though it were a neutral term, forgetting its origins in imperial erasure. Historians repeated it, cartographers inked it, pilgrims carried it. By the time the Byzantine cross rose over Jerusalem and later the crescent of Islam, the word was no longer Roman spite, it was common speech. And so when you hear the word Palestine today, remember this. Its first purpose was not ethnic, but strategic. Not identity, but obliteration. It was Rome's attempt to wipe Israel off the map of the world. Names have power. They shape memory, bend truth, command allegiance. A nation may fall, but a name can be weaponized to kill it again in history's imagination. This is why the question matters. When we ask who were the Philistines, who are the Palestinians, we must untangle history from ideology, truth from propaganda, people from labels. Because if we do not, we are not reading history, we are reliving Rome's deception. The Philistines were gone, but their name was reborn. And in time, that name would no longer belong to them, but to a new people, entirely Arab tribes, communities shaped by empire, faith, and migration. A people who would inherit a name not their own and yet make it central to their modern struggle. So how did a Roman act of erasure become the banner of a new nation? How did the word Palestine, born of conquest, become the identity of a modern people? To answer, we must cross centuries, move through caliphates and crusades, and enter the turbulent birth of the 20th century. Centuries had passed since the Philistines vanished. Rome had fallen. Byzantium had risen and crumbled. The crescent of Islam had swept across the land. Crusaders came and went. Empires changed hands. Dynasties rose and collapsed. And in this long flow of history, new peoples arrived, settled, and made the land their own. By the dawn of the modern era, the word Palestine no longer carried echoes of the Sea Peoples. It had become a geographic term, a designation of territory, a land known by many rulers, but belonging to none. And then came the 20th century. Black and white photographs capture the moment, narrow streets under the British Mandate villages framed by olive groves, men in keffiyehs, women in embroidered robes, children running between markets and mosques. These were the Palestinians, not Philistines resurrected from ancient dust, but Arab communities shaped by centuries of Ottoman rule, the spread of Islam, and the shifting borders of colonial powers. The Palestinians are Arabs, descendants of tribes and families woven together across centuries. Their tongue is Arabic, their culture deeply tied to the rhythms of Islam, with minorities of Christians woven in as well. They are not the Philistines of Samson and Goliath. Their identity is new, forged not in the Bronze Age, but in the fires of modern history. Yet identity once born is no less real. Their identity is real, their struggle undeniable, but it is not the same as David's ancient enemy. A name that began as Rome's erasure of Israel now belongs to a people who live, breathe, and fight for survival today. How much of who we are is memory, and how much is name? Names shape nations. They unite, they divide, they carry wounds and dreams. For Palestinians, the name became a vessel for longing, for resistance, for nationhood. For Israelis, it remained a reminder of loss, exile, and promise. The same word Palestine held two entirely different meanings, two conflicting destinies. During the British Mandate from 1920 to 1948, Palestinian national consciousness grew sharper. As Jewish migration increased under the shadow of Zionism, as Britain carved lines across maps, Palestinians began to see themselves not just as Arabs among Arabs, but as a distinct people rooted in that land. Identity hardened in conflict. Struggle defined belonging. This was the moment of birth, not in ancient Gath or Ashkelon, but in the 20th century under foreign rule in the crucible of competing promises. The Philistines had vanished long ago, but the Palestinians emerged as a new nation carrying the weight of a name once meant to erase. Names outlast nations. Sometimes they resurrect what no longer exists. Sometimes they create what never was. How much of your own identity is memory, and how much is name? In the comments, share what identity means to you, not as politics, but as faith. Because identity is more than a passport. It is the soul's answer to the question, who are you? Yet history is not kind. The declaration of the State of Israel in 1948 brought war, displacement, and exile. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians fled or were expelled. Their villages emptied, their homes abandoned. They became refugees in Lebanon, Jordan, Gaza, and beyond. And the name Palestinian hardened further, not just a name of a land, but of a scattered people bound together by memory and loss. What Rome once used as erasure had now become a banner of survival. The irony is staggering. A name once weaponized to destroy Israel's memory now lives as the identity of a people locked in struggle with Israel's modern state. The Philistines are gone. The Palestinians are alive. But they share nothing of blood, nothing of ancestry, only a name twisted by time, charged with meaning, carrying the weight of centuries. So if the Palestinians are not the Philistines, why does the confusion remain? Why does the echo of their name still haunt the conversation from pulpits to parliaments, from ancient prophecy to today's headlines? To answer, we must step into the present, the modern conflict where names and nations collide and prophecy whispers through the chaos. The year was 1948. The land of promise became the land of war. The modern state of Israel declared its independence, and in a single day, armies from surrounding nations marched, borders were redrawn in fire, and hundreds of thousands were driven from their homes. Villages emptied, refugees scattered, a people displaced. The name Palestine, long a shadow in history, now burned with urgency, pain, and political fire. This was no longer Samson versus Goliath. It was land versus land. Survival versus survival, nation versus nation. Tanks replaced chariots, rifles replaced slings, but the conflict remained written on the same soil, the hills of Judea, the plains of Philistia, the walls of Jerusalem. Decades passed, but the struggle only deepened. Wars in 1967 and 1973 redrew borders again, each time leaving scars that refused to heal. Gaza became a prison of desperation, the West Bank a maze of tension. The Palestinians clung to their identity forged in exile. The Israelis clung to their reborn state, the fulfillment of ancient promises. Two peoples, two destinies bound to the same strip of land. This is not simply politics, it is prophecy. The Bible never confused Philistines and Palestinians. It drew clear lines between them. And yet it did warn that in the last days the eyes of the world would be fixed on Jerusalem. Zechariah 12:3 whispers like thunder, "On that day when all the nations of the earth are gathered against her." I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all peoples. All who lift it will surely hurt themselves. Look at the headlines. Nations gather at the United Nations to debate Jerusalem. Embassies spark international outrage. Religious leaders invoke the city in prayer and protest. The ancient prophecy seems to unfold in real time. The world is being drawn to a single point on the map. The Philistines disappeared, but the Palestinians remain. They are not the same people, but their struggle has become entangled with prophecy, not by blood, but by geography. And in that geography lies destiny. The Romans resurrected the name Palaestina to erase Israel. Centuries later, that same name now fuels the fiercest debate of our age. What was once a tool of erasure has become the banner of a living people. And against them stands Israel, reborn from exile, carrying promises written in Scripture. Two peoples, two identities, both bound to the same land, both unwilling to let go. The Bible foresaw conflict around Jerusalem not as a local struggle, but as a global magnet. And today we see nations, religions, and powers pulled into its orbit. What began with Philistia and Israel has expanded into a stage where the entire world plays its part. As you hear this, let your heart reflect. Why does one small city command the attention of empires? Why does Jerusalem draw the world like iron to a magnet? Share your reflection in the comments, not as politics, but as prayer. Your voice may become part of the chorus of faith, rising above the noise of war. The shadow of the Philistines lingers in name, but the true battle now is larger than they ever knew. It is about identity, survival, and the promises of God written into the soil of the land itself. The Bible never confused Philistines and Palestinians, but it did warn that one day the world would. And when nations gather, when prophecy collides with politics, history shakes. So what then is the real difference between these two peoples? How can we separate myth from memory, history from ideology, name from identity? The answer lies in peeling back the layers to discover not only who the Philistines were and who the Palestinians are, but what their stories reveal about us today. The Philistines and the Palestinians. Their names echo as if they are one, yet their stories are separated by millennia. The Philistines were a sea people, invaders from distant shores who carved out their dominion in the coastal plains of Canaan. They bowed to gods of grain and stone, Dagon, Baal, Ashtoreth, and they became Israel's most feared enemies. But their cities fell, their gods were silenced, their people absorbed into the dust of empire. Today, no one calls themselves Philistine. Their bloodline is gone, their story is closed. The Palestinians, by contrast, are a living nation, Arabs shaped by centuries of migration, empire, and exile. Their identity sharpened in the 20th century in the crucible of colonial mandates, wars, and displacements. They speak Arabic, practice Islam and Christianity, and struggle for a homeland they call their own. Unlike the Philistines, they are not a vanished people of the past. They are flesh and blood in the present. The Philistines are history, but the Palestinians are here. The Philistines were erased by prophecy and conquest, while the Palestinians were formed by memory and conflict. They are linked not by blood, but by geography and by the name Rome once forged. That single name Palestine has carried the weight of conquest, erasure, and survival for nearly 2,000 years. This is why confusion lingers. The names sound alike. The land overlaps. The Bible speaks of Philistines with the fire of divine judgment. The news speaks of Palestinians with the urgency of modern politics. But to confuse them is to misunderstand both history and prophecy. The Philistines remind us that no empire, no army, no idol can stand against the will of God. They rose in strength, and they vanished without a trace. Their defeat was not merely military, it was theological. They were erased because their gods were powerless before the God of Israel. The Palestinians remind us of something different, the endurance of identity, the power of names, and the complexity of human struggle. They are not ancient enemies reborn, but a modern people carrying a name with deep and dangerous echoes. Their story is not written in the book of Judges, but in the headlines of today. Prophecy warned that in the last days all nations would gather against Jerusalem. And what do we see? A world divided, a city contested, a land that burns at the center of global attention. The Philistines are not the Palestinians, but the shadow of prophecy hangs over both because the land they once shared remains the epicenter of history's final chapters. The Bible never confused the two, but it did warn us that the world would. And when confusion becomes ideology and ideology becomes conflict, history itself begins to tremble. What lesson remains for us? That names can deceive, but prophecy cannot. That memory can be rewritten, but the Word of God stands. That identity may be shaped by history, but destiny belongs to the Lord of history. This is the moment where history touches prophecy. What does it mean to you? Leave your reflection not as debate, but as testimony. We are not merely viewers, we are witnesses. The Philistines have no descendants, no cities, no gods. The Palestinians remain a nation struggling in storm and exile. They are not the same. Their destinies are different. But both remind us that the land of Israel is no ordinary land. It is the stage upon which prophecy plays out. The Philistines vanished into silence. The Palestinians continue to shape headlines. Yet beyond both names lies the deeper truth, the God of Israel who alone raises and removes nations. Stay with us because after this chapter a message awaits you, one crafted especially for those who have walked long in faith, who know the weight of history, and who still look for the promise of prophecy to be fulfilled. The story of the Philistines and the Palestinians teaches us more than history. It reminds us that names can change, nations can rise and fall, but the truths of God endure. The Philistines remind us that no power, no empire, no idol lasts forever. The Palestinians remind us that identity, though shaped by suffering, can be forged in resilience. And so the question is not only about them, it is about us. What will we do with the years that remain? What name will we leave behind when our time is finished? The land we live on, the battles we fight, the struggles we carry, they are temporary. But the legacy of faith, hope, and love lasts beyond death itself. If you are older, you know this already. Life is fragile, time moves quickly, but wisdom grows with every scar. Your testimony is not wasted. Your prayers are not forgotten. Your voice still matters. Nations may vanish, but faith endures. The greatest victory is not in land or armies, but in leaving behind a legacy that points to God. And that above all is the difference that truly matters. From the sea peoples who sailed into Canaan to Samson's final act of strength to David's stone against Goliath to Babylon's hammer to Rome's renaming and finally to the Palestinians of today, we have walked through a story that spans millennia. The Philistines are gone, the Palestinians remain. Their names sound alike, but history tells us they are not the same. Scripture never confused them. Instead, it warned us that in the end, the land of Israel would be the furnace of destiny for the whole world. And now the story rests with you. History has spoken, prophecy still whispers, but reflection is yours alone. What lessons will you take from the rise and fall of nations? What legacy will you leave when your own chapter closes? If this journey has opened your eyes, let it continue. Share this video with someone wrestling with these questions. Leave your voice below, for every reflection adds another line to this unfolding scroll. And stay with us for the next revelation as we uncover more mysteries hidden in the Word of God. The scrolls are closed, but prophecy still speaks.